Tonight, a ledger tries to argue back. Snow still swallows sound at the wolf's lair as official cars nose past pines and guard dogs. Inside the concrete, the air smells of coal stoves and damp wool. Fritz Todt steps from his coat with a thin folder under his arm. He is an engineer by habit and a minister by necessity. The papers he carries are numbers, not pleas, steel quotas, machine tool hours, freight capacities, aircraft frames per month. The arithmetic is blunt. Germany can streamline, he insists, but it cannot outbuild both the United States and the Soviet Union. Not with this oil, this ore, these rails. Across the map table, Adolf Hitler listens and rejects. America's targets are propaganda, he says, boasting, drafted by salesmen and campaigners. Soviet industry is a mirage, supposedly on the verge of collapse. Precision will beat mass, morale will beat statistics. Build fewer, better. Strike first, hard, and the enemy's factories won't matter. The contrast hangs in the room. Myth versus reality, precision versus mass. Control sits at the head of the table, feedback at the door. Todt asks for decisions grounded in data. Hitler demands faith, and with it, obedience. Outside, February light drains to iron. Staff captains move memoranda like chessmen. In Todt's folder, next to a neat column of figures, 3 phrases wait like flares: 50,000 planes, Liberty ships, Tankrograd. They are not slogans, they are instructions the other side is already following. Then the floor tilts. The minister with the numbers won't make it to morning. The car idles on the frozen strip. A crewman bats ice from a wing root. The engine coughs to life. Minutes after takeoff, the aircraft drops from the sky and folds into the trees. Flames climb black against snow. The official word will be accident. Whispered alternatives will persist for years, but none ever harden into proof. By evening, the phone summons Albert Speer. He crosses passages knocked through blast walls, papers pressed to his chest, eyes taking in maps pricked with red pins and strings that lead east. He will inherit Todt's remit and a paradox: improve the flow while the well runs dry. In the weeks ahead, the ledger Todt brought would be echoed by enemy reality. Roosevelt's audacious promise of 50,000 aircraft per year ceased to be a threat and became a schedule. Hulls slid stern first from American ways, anonymous and replaceable. Far to the east, Soviet factories reassembled beyond the Urals and stamped out turrets in a blizzard of grit. Back in Rastenburg, the folder rests on a desk, edges softening with use and neglect. The numbers inside do not bluster, they only add, they only wait. This is where belief confronts arithmetic, where command meets consequence. The men around this table will steer policy by instinct or by proof. Millions will live or die by which one wins. The folder stays closed a moment longer. We follow the numbers out the door. Belief loses to arithmetic when the bodies are counted. We promise to test faith against figures, reconstructing the numbers Hitler refused to accept. We will track Roosevelt's publicly declared goal of 50,000 aircraft per year to the monthly output charts, read U.S. shipyard throughput in man-hours per hull and days per keel, and map the Soviet evacuation and restart of tank plants from the Dnieper to the Urals. We will use primary minutes, wartime statistical digests, and Speer-era records to show not only what was produced, but when and how that cadence bent strategy. Here's the twist: these numbers were not unknowable. German central planning minutes recorded bottlenecks in steel, coal, rail wagons, and machine tools. Luftwaffe tables showed aircraft losses the replacement flow could not cover. Yet disbelief became policy. Quality over quantity hardened into Tigers over T-34s, U-boat tonnage war over convoy arithmetic, bomber fantasies over fighter reality. Myth stood in for reality. Precision was asked to defeat mass. Control silenced feedback. The stakes are not abstract. At Stalingrad, battalions starved because the airlift's promised tonnage never matched loadmaster math. In the mid-Atlantic, merchant crews and U-boat men died as Liberty ships and escorts multiplied faster than new boats could train and sail. Under the February sky of Big Week, bomber crews and German fighter pilots met in air battles governed by factory tempo, fuel tables, and pilot throughput, not speeches. Bad arithmetic kills no slower than a shell. We will show our work. We will cross-check Zentrale planning transcripts against Speer's memoranda, align USAAF statistical digest curves with War Production Board summaries and U.S. Maritime Commission reports, and place Soviet output ledgers and relocation orders alongside combat timelines. Where claims are contested, we will mark the range and explain the limits. Where propaganda bloats a boast, we will weigh it against receipts. Why it matters now is simple. Leadership that ignores data trades lives for narrative. Veterans know the quiet violence of logistics. Enthusiasts know the trap of legend. This film is for both. We will follow the numbers from desk to battlefield and watch belief collide with production. The ledger will not look away again. Then we followed the consequences down the rails, across the ocean, and into the sky they darken. Belief loses to arithmetic when the bodies are counted. We promised to test faith against figures, reconstructing the numbers Hitler refused to accept. We will track Roosevelt's publicly declared goal of 50,000 aircraft per year to the monthly output charts. Read U.S. shipyard throughput in man-hours per hull and days per keel, and map the Soviet evacuation and restart of tank plants from the Dnieper to the Urals. We will use primary minutes, wartime statistical digests, and Speer-era records to show not only what was produced, but when and how that cadence bent strategy. Here's the twist. These numbers were not unknowable. German central planning minutes recorded bottlenecks in steel, coal, rail wagons, and machine tools. Luftwaffe tables showed aircraft losses the replacement flow could not cover. Yet disbelief became policy. Quality over quantity hardened into Tigers over T-34s. U-boat tonnage war over convoy arithmetic. Bomber fantasies over fighter reality. Myth stood in for reality. Precision was asked to defeat mass. Control silenced feedback. The stakes are not abstract. At Stalingrad, battalions starved because the airlift's promised tonnage never matched loadmaster math. In the mid-Atlantic, merchant crews and U-boat men died as Liberty ships and escorts multiplied faster than new boats could train and sail. Under the February sky of Big Week, bomber crews and German fighter pilots met in air battles governed by factory tempo, fuel tables, and pilot throughput, not speeches. Bad arithmetic kills no slower than a shell. We will show our work. We will cross-check central planning transcripts against Speer's memoranda, align USAAF statistical digest curves with War Production Board summaries and U.S. Maritime Commission reports, and place Soviet output ledgers and relocation orders alongside combat timelines. Where claims are contested, we will mark the range and explain the limits. Where propaganda bloats a boast, we will weigh it against receipts. Why it matters now is simple. Leadership that ignores data trades lives for narrative. Veterans know the quiet violence of logistics. Enthusiasts know the trap of legend. This film is for both. We will follow the numbers from desk to battlefield and watch belief collide with production. The ledger will not look away again. Then we follow the consequences down the rails, across the ocean, and into the sky they darken. Before faith rewrites the map, the numbers set the boundaries. The folder at Rastenburg only tallies what Germany can mine, smelt, move, fuel, and staff. That arithmetic is not opinion, it is terrain. Start with steel in the Ruhr and Upper Silesia, or trains feed blast furnaces that glow red through blackout curtains. Germany makes a lot by continental standards, but the British Empire and the United States can make more, and they draw from wider sources. Steel is the skeleton of war. Tanks, rails, ships, machine tools. Each allocation to armor steals from locomotives, wagons, or U-boats. and the Third Reich's planners feel the pinch in every meeting. Oil governs tempo. Germany has little domestic crude. It leans on Romanian fields and synthetic fuel plants that turn coal into gasoline and aviation spirit. Those facilities are capital-hungry, power-hungry, and spread across a handful of sites whose names wartime airmen will learn by heart. Moving that fuel east requires tank cars and locomotives, which themselves require steel and skilled labor. When the sums are tight, every mile driven is a choice not to drive somewhere else. The light metals are another ceiling. Aluminum needs bauxite and electricity. Germany's bauxite imports never match aircraft dreams. Occupied stocks help only so much, and smelters compete with the rail network and synthetic plants for power. Magnesium and other alloys face similar bottlenecks. Aircraft designers shoot for precision and performance. Procurement offices discovered that the bottleneck is casting capacity and sheet output, not ideas. Shipping is not a ledger the Reich can expand. This is a continental power facing a maritime blockade. Its merchant marine is limited, its access to global markets constricted, its coastal shipping menaced. Rail must carry what sea cannot. The Wehrmacht goes east on steel wheels, not in liberty holds. That means wagons, locomotives, maintenance depots, coal by the mountain, and hard choices when the same rails must carry coal to the Ruhr or to the furnaces and rations to the front. The 4-year plan promised autarky. Goering's empire ordered ersatz substitutes, new mines, and state plants to replace world trade. It delivered some capacity and a culture of command, but not slack. Polycracy multiplied offices with overlapping mandates. Ministries issued targets that outpaced tools and transport. Ideology entered the spreadsheet. Priorities bent towards showpiece weapons and prestige projects, while machine tool parks aged and spares thinned. Doctrine favored centralized micromanagement. Improvisation lived lower down in works huts and shop floors, where foremen learned to keep lines moving with whatever arrived on trucks. Labor looks abundant on paper and thin in practice. Millions of men go to the army. Millions more are imported under compulsion. Women fill gaps, but policy hesitates to mobilize them fully. Skilled toolmakers are scarce. They cannot be trained overnight. Captured workers come with language barriers, nutrition issues, and sabotage risks. Output rises when tasks are simplified and parts are standardized. It stalls when bespoke variants and rushed redesigns chew time. Transport is the quiet tyrant. The rail network runs hot before Barbarossa and never cools. The invasion of the Soviet Union adds an extra constraint, a change of track gauge, long distances, thin roads, and a motor pool built on too many types. German doctrine assumed short wars and fast encirclements. The result is a logistics system rich in staff talent and poor in trucks, tires, and depots. Horses make up the gap at the cost of speed and fodder. Every wagon in Ukraine is a wagon not moving coal in the Ruhr. Geography decides what industry can survive. The United States sits behind 2 oceans with industrial plants spread across a continent and powered by vast grids. The Soviet Union, hit hard in 1941, rips factories from the West and reroutes them beyond the Urals where bombers struggle to reach. Germany's heartland is close to the front and later within range of Allied bombers. Concentration is efficient until it is targeted. The Ruhr is Germany's strength and its exposed nerve. Here is the midsection reversal. The surprise is not that Germany failed to match Allied output. It is that, for a time, it increased production under mounting pressure. Under Speer, rationalization, shift work, and standardization began to pay. Airframes per month climbed. Tank output grew even as raw material streams narrowed. The lesson cuts both ways. When control yielded a little space to feedback, when doctrine made room for improvisation, the curves bent upward. They did not bend far enough. Plot the war with receipts. The USAAF Statistical Digest's lines, Poston's shipping tables, Harrison and Markovich on Soviet output, and 2s on the Reich's balance sheet. They describe a machine near its limits. The next choice is cultural. Cling to control or let feedback shape policy. The folder stays open as the trains move east tonight. Weeks after the crash, Albert Speer walks into the conference barrack with paper that rustles like dry leaves. The hallway smells of coal dust and wet felt. Dönitz is already there, cap on his knee, jaw set. Milch stands by a stack of aircraft tables, measuring the room more than the charts. Speer sets his folder on the green baize and waits for the nod. He is 36, an architect who learned to move concrete like chess pieces. Now he carries minutes and graphs instead of blueprints. The papers say steel allocations, rolling stock deficits, machine tool hours, foundry bottlenecks. In the top sheet, a curve shows aircraft frames climbing if factories are consolidated, shifts lengthened, and models trimmed. It is a plan to make the machine breathe, not to change its lungs. Dönitz begins first. He taps a typewritten page. Merchant shipping tonnage, sinkings to date, projected launches. He repeats the calculation he tells anyone who will listen. Strangle Britain at roughly 700,000 tons a month. Hold the Atlantic line, and the war narrows to a front Germany can win. He asks for hulls of a different kind. U-boats, crews, training time, steel diverted from armor. Milch cuts in, almost polite. Fighters, he says, keep the roar alive. Bombers are a luxury the economy cannot feed. Speer keeps his voice low. He tells them what the minutes record. Coal shortfalls constraining blast furnaces. Aluminum capped by bauxite and electricity. Rail congestion choking every promise. He will standardize parts, reduce types, push 3 shifts, and squeeze wasted motion from assembly lines. He points to the curve again. It goes up. Then he flips a second chart, Allied production potential. It is not propaganda, he says carefully. It is what American agencies publish and what Soviet movements imply. Even with reforms, Germany cannot outproduce both. Hitler steps forward from the edge of the room and waves the second chart aside. America's boasts are advertising, he says, a salesman's trick. The Soviets are on their last legs. Their factories will run out of air before spring. He touches the first chart and stabs a finger at the idea he likes. Precision. Build fewer, better. Heavy tanks that do not stop. New submarines with longer legs. Rockets that bypass fleets and trenches. Will is a force multiplier. Numbers are a crutch for the weak. The decision congeals the remarks that sound like encouragement and land as orders. The armored program leans into big cats, even as procurement officers mutter about tracks, final drives, and fuel. The Navy gets boats and a mandate to hunt tonnage as strategy. Convoy arithmetic is waved off as defensive thinking. The Luftwaffe keeps searching for an offensive idea. Fast bombers, heavy fighters, even a jet nudged toward a fighter-bomber roll when range and payload tempt. The rocket program rises from proposal to priority list. Here's the quiet reversal. Speer knows he can make the first chart happen. He can close plants and merge shops, shift tools, reassign labor, and demand that variants die. He can move output from one column to another, but he cannot move geography. A tiger consumes the steel and machining of several simpler tanks. A boat consumes weeks of training a crew Germany cannot replace quickly. A jet eats fuel an oil system cannot spare. The ledger offers power with a condition: choose. In the months that followed, the Central Planning Board met under a veneer of calm, while the minutes tallied shortages with an accountant's patience. Dönitz refined his figure for strangling Britain and pressed for submarines enough to keep hundreds at sea and sinkings near what his staff judged decisive. Milch pushed fighter priority as losses climbed and the bomber arm shrank in meaning. The preserved documents read like an X-ray. Each choice to prize precision over throughput became delivery schedules that slipped, maintenance loads that spiked, and transport requirements that could not be met. Hitler's skepticism of American scale and Soviet relocation didn't vanish with new minutes. Reports he trusted reinforced the story he preferred, that American labor could not be disciplined, that Soviet plants were phantoms assembled in panic, that morale would fail before industry delivered. When unwelcome figures arrived, from attaches, from occupied records, from broken ciphers, they were quarantined by doubt or wrapped in the promise that surprise offensives would render them irrelevant. Control beat back feedback, and myth kept reality distant. Speer collects his papers, nods to the admirals and airmen, and is told to proceed. He will, and for a time the lines on his first chart will rise faster than his critics think possible. He will rationalize, bully, improvise, and find capacity in places his predecessors ignored. Out on the Atlantic and across the steppe, the bet he watches take shape will be measured against shipways, rails, graves. The folder leaves the table and meets hard weather, Atlantic spray on steel decks, steppe dust in tank grills. It is 1942, and belief still outruns arithmetic. Two arenas will settle the argument, one wave by wave, the other by milepost. Off the American coast, tankers burn like floating kilns, while U-boats ghost through lanes lit by peacetime cities. On the southern steppe, trains push east under blackout, cars tarped in winter grit. Precision stands in parade order, sleek torpedoes, heavy tanks, man taught to do a few things exactly right. Mass arrives ungainly and loud. Convoys welded from anything that floats, factories rebolted far from the front, parts standardized until they look like stamps. Control clutches the pencil, feedback waits in the hard engine noise. January turns and the Atlantic yields easy prey. Donitz calls it a second happy time, a hunter's month. Shore lights still glow from hotels and boardwalks. Tankers silhouette themselves against neon. Merchants sail unescorted along the coast because habit is hard to break and escorts are scarce. Oil slicks catch fire, sending heat into winter air. U-boat captains write up tallies that read like vindication. The tonnage curve bends in their favor. In Kiel and Lorient, BDU plots wolf packs with pins and radio orders, central hands steering scattered boats toward convoys reported by spotters and decrypted calls. The method is precise, the control absolute. It also leaves a seam. Every order sent is a signal heard, and the air fills with bearings the other side begins to use. West, the yards speed up. At Richmond, California, Kaiser's ways look like scaffolds for a civilization assembled overnight. Welders cut arcs, hull plates fly from cranes, a whistle starts shifts like a metronome. Workers do not talk about strategy, they talk about jigs and piecework, about parts that fit the first time. A Liberty ship is ugly, slow, and what the math needs. Man-hours per hull fall by more than half in a year. Days on the ways shrink from weeks to days. One hull, the Robert E. Peary, is assembled in just over 4 days. Part stunt, part signal that the bottleneck has moved. The U.S. Maritime Commission's graphs climb as if pulled from above. Every keel laid is a convoy promised. Feedback turns the coastal fight. Admiralty returns log sinkings against convoy sizes and escort strength, and the curve is unambiguous. Ships in convoy survive at higher rates. The United States blackens the shoreline, orders coastal convoys, and stitches air patrols across the routes. Long-range liberators close the mid-ocean gap. Escort carriers drop Wildcats and Avengers in the lanes. Centimetric radar and the Lee light deny night a privilege. HFDF rooms fix bearings on BDU traffic, and convoy commanders steer to advantage. Each measure is incremental. Together they become compounding. German boats still strike, but the strike now costs boats. In May 1943, the arithmetic breaks on the other axis. U-boat losses spike beyond replacement, and the packs are pulled back. The month will be remembered as Black May. The happy time ends where feedback defeats control, and tonnage becomes a tide the hunters cannot turn. On the steppe, belief takes a southern road. Case Blue begins with maps that presume one more blow will empty the Soviet reservoir. Fuel for the panzers is rationed, but the targets are ambitious: the Don Bend, the Volga, the Caucasus fields that shimmer like a cure. German columns move with familiar audacity. At the tip, formations still win battles in days. Behind them, the railheads stretch, the trucks grind, and the horses eat the oats meant for men. Staff officers work miracles of control with thin tools. They can schedule trains and prioritize bridges. They cannot change distances or grades. The plan's premise, a Soviet industry near collapse, does not hold. Far behind the line, workshops that once stood in Kharkov or Leningrad now spit shavings in the Urals. The machine the Germans expect to seize has been moved. In Chelyabinsk and Nizhny Tagil, the evacuation's brutal clarity becomes production. Tankograd is not a nickname, it is a function. Barracks become dormitories, machine tools bolt down in frost, furnaces roar under roofs that barely exist, engineers trim the T-34 where they can for speed. Fewer castings, standardized turrets, simplified optics when glass is short, and welding that favors throughput without surrendering strength. The design is not elegant by German standards. It does not need to be. It needs to be built, fueled, and fixed in a field. Soviet records show output lifting month over month across 1942 and into 1943, sometimes despite air raids, shortages, and relocations still bedding in. What matters is cadence. Trains take the beat. A run of tanks leaves each week, alongside guns and shells. The Red Army fights like a factory at the front, swapping units and equipment to keep pressure constant. A signals NCO notices before the staff believes. He is posted near a small station west of Oral, wires strung across poles that crack in the morning cold. His job is line discipline and traffic reports, the dull art that keeps dispatchers honest. He counts trains because the habit calms him. In June 1943, the numbers change. Night trains come with the lamps hooded. Day trains come heavy, couplers sagging. Flat cars carry low silhouettes under tarps that fool no one. He writes it down in a pocketbook. 2 long freights before dawn, 3 after, 4 by midday. The noon passenger, then coal, then tanks again. When the guns open, he will be in a dugout relaying bearings and call signs. For now, the arithmetic is simple. The eastbound line owns the daylight. He thinks of home each time the rails sing. German armor arrives for the summer offensive looking the part. Tigers rumble forward with a sound that makes men step back. Panthers roll out new and sharp, their guns long, their armor sloped. Crews drill fastidious routines, torque checks, track tension, oil temperatures, recorded like vital signs. Precision is doctrine made iron. Then the march to contact begins. Bridge after bridge needs reinforcement or replacement. Recovery vehicles earn their keep in hours. On warm days, the engine decks glow. On bad days, the final drives complain, and reports describe fires that start without warning. Spare parts lag behind the tip because every part is heavy and the rails are thin. The farther they go, the more the front consumes the maintenance table. At the same time, Soviet brigades move with boxes of spares and interchangeable components they can swap with a hammer and a pry. When contact comes, the first shot matters. The second and the 30th require a supply chain. Kursk turns precision into a question of stamina. The salient is not a point to pierce, but a fortress with depth, belts of mines, trenches, anti-tank guns nested like teeth, and reserves that can move along interior lines. German planners assemble a spear with what they believe is enough edge. The blade is sharp, it is also narrow. Reports from the opening days note panthers sidelined by breakdowns and fires, tigers bogged in fields where sappers worked all night and still could not lay enough trackway. Where the spear bites, it does real damage. The problem is the accounting. Each kilometer taken costs days, fuel, tires, and irreplaceable gearboxes. Soviet fronts absorb blows and feed in fresh units with equipment coming off trains the same week. The Red Army's tank parks look like inventories, not lineups. Artillery fires by timetable, supplied from dumps whose replenishment is a rail function. In that environment, qualitative advantage is measurable at the point of contact, not across the week. By the time the blade finds fresh air, the handle is gone. Back on the sea lanes, the war inside the math hardens. Convoy planners run tables that assign escorts by risk and weather. Shipyards deliver hulls faster than crews can be trained. Gunnery schools shorten courses because the ocean will finish the lesson. German training does not stretch. Crews sent out in 1943 knew less on average than those who sailed 2 years before, and they faced a different ocean. A surfaced boat at night is not invisible anymore. A submerged boat is slower than its hunters once aircraft direct ships to the spot. BDU reroutes, shifts patrol lines, orders silence, and watches the loss tallies anyway. Admiralty records show the inflection everyone remembers. Dozens of U-boats lost in a single month, then a general withdrawal to regroup. Donitz writes about betrayal by science and an enemy with infinite factories. The plainer reading is that feedback turned into doctrine faster on one side than the other, and that the shipways beat the pens. Inside Germany, Speer's reforms do what they can. Factories consolidate, variants die, shift work becomes standard. Output of airframes and tanks rises through 1942 into 1943, despite raids and raw material ceilings. Toast notes the astonishment. A strained economy still finds a higher gear. It is not enough. The reason sits in comparisons the leadership would not face. Allied shipbuilding scales with a continent. American aircraft plants sprawl under acre roofs. The Soviet rail map runs beyond bomber range to regions that feed and guard factories. German gains occur within a box. Each Tiger displaces multiple simpler vehicles the Army could fuel and keep. Each leap adds training burdens schools cannot absorb. Doctrine privileges precision, improvisation survives at the margins. A graph can point upward and still lie. What matters is not that the line rises, but whether its slope changes battles while men are alive to exploit it. The whistle cuts the night at Richmond like a starting gun. Floodlights turn the yard into daylight as a winter fog lifts off the bay. A foreman steps to a chalkboard nailed to a timber post and writes in block letters, "Goal, 3 ships this week." Around him, welders and masks strike arcs that spit blue against primer gray. A prefabricated bow section slides on greased skids. The place runs like a sentence with no period. Sections arrive from sub-assembly shops, get squared, stitched, and shoved toward the ways. The clock does not rule, the schedule does. He walks the line and taps a stencil on a steel plate to check the seam. Paper tags hang from holes, each tag a part number that will match another tag hours from now. Forklifts cough and reverse. A crane operator watches a hand signal and lowers a deck house until the guide pins kiss. The foreman's chalkboard is not a hope, it is a contract with the crews on the night shift. They have the jigs, the gauges, and the discipline of repetition. The lesson is simple and not romantic. Build the same thing faster each time. Across town, the War Production Board meets under fluorescent hum. Charts cover a wall like a second wallpaper. Steel allocation by quarter, aircraft completions by month, man-hours per hull trending down. A clerk sharpens a pencil and reads out changes to the controlled materials plan. The room nods when someone says the only way to feed every contract is to make fewer kinds of things. A car plant will build tanks, but only one model. An aircraft plant will build bombers, but not 3 versions at once. The charts settle arguments that speeches cannot. This was the American trick, improvisation on a framework. Factories learned to change quickly because the frame stayed the same. Standard parts lists, shared tooling, and interplant agreements carried components from one coast to another without argument. Welding replaced much of the riveting that slowed builds. Subassemblies moved like kit pieces from inland shops to the yards, and the yards bolted them into place on a schedule that made sense to the men on the floor. Man-hours per Liberty hull fell sharply, because repetition is a teacher. The ships were not the best, they were the same, and sameness was a weapon when the question was volume. Here's the twist that punctures the myth. Volume did not mean chaos. The framework kept improvisation from turning sloppy. When a supplier missed a delivery, a second supplier could fill the order because the drawings and gauges matched. When the board cut a model line, the floor crews already knew how to build the remaining one faster. The feedback loop was brutal and honest. The yard posted yesterday's throughput in public, and crews took it as a dare. Numbers were not decorations on a speech. They governed paychecks and launch dates. In Washington, The pledge that had sounded like theater became a schedule. The president had said 50,000 planes in a year. By 1943, the official digest counted well beyond that. Month after month, thousands of trainers, fighters, and bombers moving from final inspection to flight lines. Plants in Fort Worth, Long Beach, Willow Run, and Seattle worked shifts that blurred sunrise. The figures were not smooth. They stair-stepped as new tooling arrived and as workers learned jobs they had never seen before. But the staircase went up. When a squadron commander asked about replacements, the answer came in acronyms and carloads, not in promises. Thousands of miles away, Chelyabinsk breathes under a blackout. The furnaces throw orange on snow that never looks clean. Inside the tractor plant that became a tank city, a whistle rips the shift change, and men and women move like a tide. A casting crew lifts a turret mold with a traveling crane. The sand smells like wet iron. A line chief checks a gauge against a turret ring and nods. On a test stand, a V2 diesel starts and shakes, then settles to a disciplined rumble. The word here is not elegance, the word is enough. Standardization rules the floor. Jigs shim every weld. Templates in wood and steel hang from pegs, labeled so a new hand cannot mistake the angle or the hole pattern. Crates from the West arrive with chalk numbers tied to drawings. They open like a sentence finished in a different alphabet. Turrets come cast where foundry capacity exists, and welded where it does not, but they fasten to the same ring, accept the same gun, and bolt to the same hull. The assembly line does not wait for perfect, it waits for fitted. Outside, a track loop chews through snow, and each finished tank runs a lap until the crew chief is satisfied that today's parts make a whole. The scale did not appear by accident. In 1941, as the front ripped east, Soviet planners ordered machine tools and managers onto trains. Whole factories dismantled under fire and sent beyond the Urals. It was a wager on depth and time. The restart was ugly. Power lines lagged plants, housing lagged power. Tools froze in sheds while roofs rose around them. Yet by 1942, the line steadied, and by 1943, the output of tanks, guns, and ammunition stood at levels that astonished even those who believed in them. The design philosophy matched the logistics. Keep the model simple enough to build and fix, keep the parts interchangeable, and feed the front without pause. A lathe operator wipes frost from a bench and clears chips with a brush that looks older than he is. He writes a short line to a brother at the front and tucks it in his coat until a courier comes. He does not know which brigade will get the tanks his section helps finish. He knows the trains leave on time because he hears the whistles at night like an echo to the factory whistle by day. When engines fire on the test loop, he counts the seconds until idle smooths, a private ritual for luck. The line chief tells him the numbers, not the rumors, and that is how he keeps the pace. Across the lines, German control reflexes pulled in the other direction. The jet that could have arrived first as a pure interceptor became, for a time, a project burdened by a demand to carry bombs. Accounts and testimony differ on how absolute that order was, but schedules suffered as engineers chased a role change at the moment when the defense needed speed above all. Fighter priority as policy came late, after bombing had scarred the Ruhr and fuel had turned scarce. The program that tried to rationalize models still tolerated variants that pleased commanders more than depots. A heavy tank entered service with too few spares and too little transport to move its appetite. The reflex favored control from the top, precise goals announced as if precision would conjure capacity. It could not. The schedule does not bend to speeches, and the men at the front pay when a calendar slips. Back at Richmond, the loop from floor to office to floor again completes itself each day. A tally clerk posts yesterday's weld inches and hours per section. The plant manager phones the board, argues for more plate, and hears that the request will be met if the numbers justify it. When a sub-assembly team beats the standard, their method becomes tomorrow's instruction across every shift. Improvisation lives, but only inside inside the frame that keeps parts compatible and promises met. In Berlin, minutes recorded promises of consolidation that often collided with directives to protect prestige programs. The frame bent, then bent again, and shops learned to wait for the next order rather than trust the one they had. Reality did not argue, it delivered. Liberty hulls slid daily, yards across the coasts lit the sky, as if a festival never ended. The official tallies chalked thousands of aircraft each month, and hundreds of ships each quarter. In the Urals, tank parks filled faster than depots could issue paint. This was not rumor or propaganda, it was the visible answer to a promise mocked in distant briefings. Precision had a place, but mass set the tempo, and tempo is what wars measure in blood. Here is the ink behind the numbers. Receipts matter, so citations appear on screen whenever a figure or quote matters. For German planning and output, we draw from Zentrale Planning minutes at Nuremberg, cross-referenced with spare-era Rüstungsberichte. For Allied capacity, we use wartime statistical digests and official histories with clear definitions and monthly granularity. From the German side, the Central Planning Board transcripts in trials of war criminals provide steel, coal, transport, and labor allocations in participants' words. Albert Speer's Inside the Third Reich, then Spandau, add texture, but are treated as self-exculpatory. We check them against Gitta Sereni and Martin Kitchen, and against the minutes. For U-boats, Donitz's 10 years and 20 days is read with BDU diary extracts and Admiralty assessments. Tooze's Wages of Destruction and Overy's War and Economy and Why the Allies Won map the ledger. From the Allied side, the USAAF's Statistical Digest supplies aircraft and training series by month. War Production Board summaries and U.S. Maritime Commission reports give man-hours per hull, keels laid, and launches. British official histories, edited by Poston, cover munitions, shipping losses, and convoy protection. Soviet output comes from Markovich and Harrison, and from Overy's syntheses, with factory reports. Definitions appear on every graph. Aircraft are accepted airframes. Tonnage denotes gross tons. Tanks are separated from self-propelled guns and specified by model when it matters. Where claims are contested, we say so. The scope and timing of any ME-262 bomber order appear as ranges with on-screen footnotes drawn from testimony and correspondence. The count of factories evacuated east is a bounded estimate from Soviet and German tallies. The 4-day Liberty build of SS Robert E. Peary is noted as a highly prepared demonstration, with start to launch defined. When casualty, sortie, or loss figures diverge, we prefer contemporaneous ledgers and show the spread. Visual accuracy is a promise. Captions identify archives, NARA and the Imperial War Museum. Models and variants match the moment described. Liberty, not victory, in 1942. Panther Os-D at Kursk. Escorts labeled by class, units, time frames, and rates appear with absolutes to prevent false impressions. This is how myth yields to reality and control yields to feedback. Let documents speak. Keep numbers in their units, then return to front they govern. Where a map, a sortie total, or a launch count drives a decision, we will link citation to the moment it mattered in the field. The ledger reaches 1944 and starts collecting debts. Dawn breaks over Luna in a chemical stench. Sirens lift and fall. Black flak knots the sky. Bomb racks open, and the plant that turns coal into fuel buckles. Fire crews fight chemistry as much as flame. On a fighter strip, a crew chief siphons fuel from a truck to fill 2 Bf-109s and leaves the third dry. The arithmetic is visible. The oil system collapses and the Luftwaffe flies on fumes. By mid-1944, the oil and transport campaigns had torn the nerves out of German mobility. Synthetic plants at Luna, Politz, and Bleckhammer were hit again and again. Ploesti bled. Rail yards cracked under the transportation plan. Fuel went first to fighters, then to none. Pilot training hours fell. gunnery practice shrank, and squadrons taxied more than they flew. After Big Week, the defense that should have come earlier arrived, but too late. Jets reached units in handfuls that could not train, and the sky filled with enemies who never seemed to run out. In the pens at Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, a petty officer polishes a depth gauge that will not dive. Orders shift, sortie less, train more, survive until a new type arrives. Black May had already forced a retreat. The Schnorkel buys endurance but not invisibility. Escort carriers and radar erase the night. New boats with new batteries sit unfinished or unblooded as crews phase in too fast. Control once radiated from BDU headquarters in precise signals. Now silence is doctrine, and the boats tie up by the score, proof that the ocean belongs to arithmetic. On the Eastern Front, a tiger sits under birch shadows, with its crew listening to the fuel pump clatter. A corporal walks a hose from a drum and watches the gauge creep. The battalion commander radios that the attack goes on regardless. In 1944, the war turned into marches the tanks could not afford. Operation Bagration broke Army Group Center in weeks. Attempts to counterpunch often arrived with a dozen runners instead of regiments. The heavy tanks that stunned platoons could not be in enough places, while Soviet formations rotated fresh brigades built from a pipeline that never stopped. The signal's NCO, posted now farther west, does not count trains anymore. He counts gaps. Daylight belongs to fighter bombers that ride the rails and scissor the telegraph lines he once kept straight. Freight dribbles through at night with cars facing the wrong way. Field kitchens mixed with wounded and scrap. He writes fewer numbers in his pocketbook because it feels dishonest to pretend a pattern remains. When he hears the rumble again, it isn't transport, it is the front itself pushing toward him at a speed he had never seen going east. This is the bill for disbelief. Precision without scale could win a duel and lose a campaign. Control that silenced feedback created a world where right answers arrived as ruins. The regime asked tigers to replace divisions, rockets to replace navies, and will to replace fuel. The Allies did something plainer. They held to standard models, listened when graphs contradicted ambition, and spent time teaching a workforce to repeat the right mistakes until they became skill. Veterans know this instinctively. They remember the quiet tyranny of supply and the relief when promises match deliveries. Legacy is caution. Leaders should demand receipts, not reassurance. To see how the Atlantic turned on arithmetic, watch Black May, how Allied math broke the U-boats. To weigh the jet detour, see ME-262, fighter, bomber, or missed chance. The ledger waits. The choice remains.